This is a story of my life, Joyce's story. My full name is Joyce Thelma Wolf Neff, born January the 5th, 1934, in St. Elizabeth Hospital, Covington, Kentucky, Kenton County. My parents were Mary Angela Campson Wolf, and my father was George Edward Wolf. After I was released from the hospital, we resided at 1821 Holman Street. This was the house that my grandfather, who I call Pop, built in his spare time. And they were going to live up in the 3 upstairs rooms, and we were going to rent the downstairs rooms. And in the course of being there, when I was 9 months old, Mother was changing my diapers on the kitchen table. I rolled off and broke my shoulder, which resulted in a cast that was like a swath. It went from one shoulder, it was wide, and it went down under my armpit, up my back, to the other side shoulder. My father was a pharmacist, and he had a drugstore at 13th and Greenup. In January, he had an open house, January of 41, for his new drugstore, which was at Pike in Maine, now demolished, and that area is a parking lot. My grandfather was an immigrant. He came over around the age of 16. We all called him Pop, but his name was Joseph Bernard. And I remember him sitting in a Morris chair, which is like a recliner now. It was in the kitchen, and he'd sit in there smoking his cigars and looking out the window onto the side porch. He made special little things for me. He made me a playpen and a sandbox, and he was a cabinet maker by right, but he got laid off when World War I came because of being German, and so he had spare time. My mother, she was a hairdresser or a hair designer, as she would rather be called, and I've never had to go to a beauty shop in my life. After my mother, my girls were also beauticians. When I got to be about 5 years old, we moved to Fort Mitchell in the summertime, so I was 5 and a half. And my grandpa Wolf, who we also called Pop, his name was Edward, nicknamed Boog. Anyway, he built the house in Fort Mitchell on 8 Lucerne, and we lived there until, well, I still live there. I also, by this time, I had a baby sister named Lois Angela, and she was 2 years old. Well, I learned all the kids in the neighborhood. There was a bunch, and they were all going to Blessed Sacrament School, a Catholic school, and I wanted to go too. So Mother went up and talked to Father Blease, and he said I could be starting the first grade, even though I was only 5. So I went to the first grade. I had Sister Loyola. In the second grade, I had Sister Benedict, who I came to find out years later was the sister of Jim Bunting, who was the sheriff that ran the mob gangsters out of Newport. In the third grade, I had Sister Viola, and after that, things become complicated. My daddy died January the 19th, 1941, George Edward Wolf. When I was in the second grade, I was making my first communion. And one Sunday morning, my father drove me to church because the second grade went to church and sat together at a special time. And then he was going to go on to the drugstore to make some prescriptions to be delivered. So after he dropped me off, he went to the store. Then I walked home from church, and before I got to my house, I was stopped by Margaret Humpert, and she told me to come to their house. And she told me that my father was in the hospital and was sick, and that's where my mother was. Well, later I found out he wasn't sick, he was dead. Mother never talked much about it at all. And so anybody asked me, how'd your father die? I'd always say a heart attack. But the truth is, he either committed suicide or was murdered. And here are the facts. He went to his drugstore, filled the prescriptions, and his delivery man was about 30. He went out to deliver the drugs. and he said to him, "Bring the money back to Mrs. Wolf." And when his name was also George, when George came back, he found my father unconscious in the room in back of the store. Called the life squad to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. They put a Levine tube down his stomach and aspirated the contents and found that it had strychnine in it. Later, I found out that no pharmacist would ever take a dose of strychnine. That would be the worst possible way to die. He never left us a note. We had no clue. Our assumption is it was the mob and it had something to do with the drugs. Maybe he wouldn't cooperate or whatever. I don't know. But that presented a problem for my mother because she had to work and there was no one to take care of us. And my grandmother she had my grandfather then, and she really didn't want to be bothered with us. And so Father Ed, my great uncle, worked it out with the Villa Madonna for us to come out there and board free. So in the 4th grade, I was at the villa with Sister Aurelia, who I got along with all right, but she was a little two-faced. And then I had her also in the 5th grade. The 7th grade, I had Sister Regina, who was the sweetest, saintliest nun I ever known. And I also had her in the 8th grade. Now, Lois was only 2 years old when she went out there. So they would take her over to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, shared the same classroom and the same teacher with Sister Antoinette. And Lois would just sit in a desk and color and do things like that. And then when she was 5, they let her go to school. She was 4 when she went there. And so it goes on, and Mother would come to visit us on Sunday afternoons, and she wouldn't be on time all the time. Visiting hours was from 2 to 4. And we would stay, our dorms were up on the 3rd floor of the Academy building, and I would stand up there with the others, and we would wait for the ring that someone had a visitor. And then one of us would run down to see who it was. And we would wait, and we would wait in anticipation. And when she was late, that was so disheartening. We never did much when we went out. We drove around, or once we went and got Grandma and Grandpa Wolf and took them up in DeVue Park. I have some pictures of that. And then when we would get back, Sister Eileen would take Lois and walk up to the 3rd floor with her. And all the time, Lois would be screaming and hollering and kicking. And you could hear her all over the buildings. Being young as she was, she didn't understand. But, you know, I had an understanding at the villa that it had to be this way, that my daddy was gone. But Lois never understood it. And she was never with me because she was younger. She was put in different dormitories, and so it was really difficult for her. And she did go 1 year longer, I think, than I did at the villa. Now, through the summer, we stayed with Grandma. My grandfather had died around 1946, and so Grandma moved upstairs then, and we moved in. No, she rented out the upstairs. She made the first 2 rooms she rented to her lady friends, and that was her source of income. And then the downstairs, we all lived together. I had to sleep in the same bed as my mom in the front room, and Lois slept on the day couch in the dining room. And the kitchen was big, and everybody always gathered in the kitchen. And then there was a big screen porch off of the kitchen. I loved my grandmother. I did all kinds of things for her. I would help her hang her wash out on the line because there was no such thing as a dryer back then. I would help her dust or run the hand sweeper. Or I loved to help her stretch her lace curtains on those frames, put the loops on those little nail heads. But as time went on, here we are now. I'm in the 8th grade. Lois, I think, was in the 4th grade because there's 4.5 years between us. And Mother had gotten the people to leave. She had rented out the house at 8 Lucerne, and so she asked them to leave, that she was going to take possession of it and live there herself. And so we did. And the feeling I had as I got off of the school bus and walked down Alpine, and saw our house on a bright, sunny May day is hard to explain. My heart exploded. I was so happy. Life at the villa was austere. There was no telephones. If we wanted to make a telephone call, we had to go down the 3 flights of steps in the Academy building to the basement, which wasn't lit, and make a call on the payphone. Or if my mother would call, she would call from down there. Also, in the dining room, we were served whatever they had made, and we were not allowed to have seconds. And if we wanted a second glass of milk, you took your life into your hands. High school students that were there could get as much as they wanted, but they didn't want the grade school kids to fill up with water. So when Sister would leave the dining room, we'd make a mad dash at the other end of the dining room, fill up a glass of water, and make a mad dash back. If we got caught, we got thrown out. Well, I got caught once, and I got thrown out, didn't get my supper, and I waited out in the hall, which was dark, till supper was over. That was your punishment. And there was a bookstore, and that's where if Mother would leave change with Sister Ermengarde, who was a very sweet nun. You might as well say she was my co-mother. She was a German nun, and she was heavy, and she played no favorites. But Mother would leave money for us if we wanted to go down and get maybe a candy bar or we needed some kind of school supply. We never knew what a Coke was. We never had Coke or soft drink. Our daily routine was to get up in the morning, get dressed, walk in line down to breakfast, eat breakfast, come back up to the dormitories, gather our books or whatever we might have to take to school, and went over to the Brown House. That's what the school building was called. There was first, second, and third together, and then fourth, fifth, and then sixth, seventh, and eighth. And then after school, we'd go back up to our dormitory and change our uniforms into some kind of play clothes. Not pants, though. We never wore pants. That wasn't a thing of the day. At first, when the weather was warm, we played on the playground. After that, we played kickball. And I hate that game to this day. I was never a good kicker. I could never, and we played it in the tennis court. And so the surface was really rough. It wasn't asphalt, I don't know what it was, but it was really rough. So if you fell down, you really got a skinned knee. I don't care how cold it was, we played kickball, or we went for a long walk after school down Amsterdam Road, maybe as far as the WCKY tires, or the other way as far as that Ludlow, the Amsterdam Bromley Road. At that time, it was gravel road, but now it's all beautiful homes and subdivisions in that direction. What else? I want to tell you about some of the games we played growing up at the villa. We played memory games like, repeat after me, and then you tell a story, and everybody adds another phrase to it. Or you name something with an A or B, C down the alphabet, and if you miss, you're out. Buzz, and that was, you had to know your times tables for that, because if you hit like on multiples of 7, you had to say buzz. Then there was rope and double dutch and hopscotch and some ball games, and I wish I can remember them. There was house ball. 1, 2, 3, O'Leary, 4, 5, 6, O'Leary, 7, 8, 9, O'Leary, 10, O'Leary, postman. But every time you threw the ball, before you caught it, you had to do something different. It might be catch it under your knee, or clap so many times, or turn around, or do something. Or some of them were like, name 5 cars I know, name 5 fruit I know, 5 flowers. And you had to do them like that before you caught the ball. And if you didn't get it, then you lost your turn. And then there was jacks. We were pros at jacks. That was the big thing in the winter. And you never hear of anybody playing jacks anymore. And they were made out of metal. They weren't those little plastic jacks, even if you could find them today. Jacks, in a way, is like pickup sticks. That was another game. And then we played outdoor games because we had little kids. We had to play go in and out the window and bring around the Rosie and the farmer in the Dell and London Bridge is falling down. Anyway, I don't know if any of you have heard of those things. But that's what I did when I was in grade school. Back to the villa, we also had to go to benediction every evening in the month of May because that was Blessed Mother's month, and the month of October because that was the month of the Rosary. There also was a swimming pool at the villa in the basement, and every Saturday we did get to go swimming. Nice little treat. Always liked the water. And you could, get swimming lessons and things like that. I was the second highest in the 8th grade, and they had been given 4-year scholarships and 1-year scholarship. But wouldn't you know, I guess because we were the poor wolf girls, they didn't give out any 1-year scholarships. And Mildred Marshall, she was worthy of it, a 4-year scholarship, but she didn't take it, and so it went to waste. She went over to General Hospital Nursing, which is now UC. Now, I had met Bill when I was 16, and we always went out in big gangs of kids together. Even before Bill, the whole Latin school, big bunch of seniors and group of us girls, and they'd pick us up. They weren't driving yet. We'd go down on a streetcar. We'd go over to the ball game or to show in downtown Cincinnati. And then on Saturday nights, there was a KC dances up at 11th and Madison. And all the Catholic schools, the girls went there, and so did the guys. And then if you were lucky, one of them would ask to go home with you, and then they'd ride on the bus with you and take you home. And that was nice because I feared walking down Highland Pike alone in the dark late at night because there had been some episodes that had happened near the house with a man hiding in the bushes. But I would park my bicycle at Peggy's house. She was my best friend, Peggy Nolan, and I'd park it in her side yard, and she was only about 3 or 4 houses from Dixie Highway, so I'd get off the streetcar and hop on my bike, and I'd call my mother and say I'm on my way, and I'd zoom down Highland and up Lucerne, lickety-split. So I graduated in May of 51, and we wore long white dresses and big brimmed hats, and Mother made me a hair-braided hat, and we had a big graduation party in the backyard of my extended family. Father Ed was there too. And we grilled. That was getting to be popular then, so that was the first grill out that we had ever had. Oh, I forgot. Every day we had a day at the end of the year, which was called Play Day. And White Castle would bring their grills to the villa and grill us White Castles, and we got them for free. And I loved them. I still do to this day. Lois remained at the villa for another year. My grandmother, since my grandpa had died by now, sold her house and came to live with us on Lucerne. Not right away, though. She came to our house first, and then later lived with her sister-in-law by her husband's first wife. I'll have to tell you that story. And Grandma came to live with us because she had sold her house. And then she stayed, I don't know, maybe a year or two. And she was real friendly with Mrs. Freed. That's where the Arlinghouses live now. And just Grandma and I just hit it off together. We had what we called a sewing club, but we never sewed. And it was my turn, and I brought the girls to my house, and what the Grandma fixed, plain Jell-O. I could have cried, but nothing was said. And then one time, one girl hit it, and she lived way out on Arcadia Avenue, way down, and that was a long haul home. I think my mother would have died if she'd known I had to walk that far. So now I'm graduated, and I have to figure out what I'm going to do. I had to decide where I didn't know what I wanted to do after I graduated. Didn't know anything. And Margaret Humpert wanted me to take this class in hematology and learn how to draw blood and things like that. Maybe a 2-year course or something like that. But I went to school down St. E's, and I started in September. And so I more or less got talked into nursing, and it was starting in September. after I graduated in May. So, and I really, really did like the bookwork. I enjoyed it. And probably if they had had nurse practitioners back then, I would have done that because I even considered being a doctor. But then I was afraid of the liability. What if I made a mistake and sued? But I really liked all my studies. So when I went into training, I was dating Bill, and Bill was very possessive. He didn't want you talking to nobody, and no other guy, I mean. And so, anyway, he went in the service. It was the Korean emergency, and he had been in the Navy 2 years, regular Navy, and then he was in the reserve for 4 years. And it was in the third year that they called him back because of the Korean emergency. And then he was gone another either a year or 18 months. So that took up a pretty good time. So I wasn't bothered when I was studying. But he wanted to buy me an engagement ring. And I kept saying no. I didn't want to. But he was afraid I'd go out with somebody else. So I took it on the sly. I never wore it at home. We couldn't wear it on duty, so there was very few times that I did wear it. Of course, when he came home, I had to wear it. And then I had to tell my mother. But Mother never cared for Bill so much, so. And that goes back to the Wessels and Campson. I don't know if it was rivalry or jealousy or what it was. Who was the best up there at St. Augustine? Bill would come home on the weekends. His home base before he was out to sea was Norfolk, Virginia. And he'd thumb home with truck drivers and so on. And then Jim Kincaid, Laverne's husband, would drive him to the airport at 11 o'clock on Sunday night, or maybe it was Saturday night. He couldn't be AWL. And I'd go with him. And Jim's car was kind of like a rattling trap car. And he had to put his foot to the metal to get him out there, because we never left before 11 o'clock, and the plane took off at 11:30 to get him on that plane. And it was always a mad dash. But he never missed it, and he was never AOL. And then he went on the Mediterranean, not the cruise, but circuit. Bill liked to do many things when he was younger. He liked to play baseball. That ended about the time Greg was born. It was getting too hard to drag all the kids to the games and let them play in the dust and the dirt. They were filthy. He liked horseshoes also, and camping. But Bill was a singer. And whenever there was a party, bunch of people, he knew every song that was ever written, I believe, and he had a good voice, and he could just lead everything, all the songs. He was the life of the party. He worked for the U.S. Post Office, 311 shift mostly, and when he come home at night, he could write poetry, and he wrote lots of poetry about the family and love and God. You never know it, but he was a spiritual man. And then Bill came home. I only had to go like that until he came home around Thanksgiving time. And I only had to go like till May when I graduated. And my last 3 months were down at can't think, St. Joseph's. It's a psych hospital, or it was a psych hospital down in Louisville. It was across from not Louisville, Lexington, across from the Campbell House. But since then, it all got torn down, and St. Joseph's Hospital got built there. So I guess it looks entirely different. And when I got passed my boards fine, I was scared to death might have to retake something because they were hard. But I got through on flying colors. And then that was in September. No, we finished up in September, and then we had to wait to take the boards. And we had to go to Louisville to the Brown Hotel, and the examinations were given there. And we stayed overnight. It took 2 days. So Bill was home. I was finished with school. And so we decided then the next May 7th, we would get married. I was married May the 7th, 1955, on a glorious, sunny, warm May day at the Church of the Blessed Sacrament. And we invited 200 people. I don't know what the actual count was. Mass was like 10 o'clock in the morning at Blessed Sacrament, and Father Ed presided. I would like to elaborate a little more on my wedding party. My maid of honor was Lois, my sister, my cousin Mary Sue Mollenkamp, a friend by the name of Ruth Lubker, and a schoolmate of mine, Nancy Schran Roding. Bill's man was Joe Mosier, and then he had Jerry and Harold Neff in the wedding, and Norbert Dorning. The girls wore pink crystalette, and we made large-brimmed hats made out of lace that were open in the back. And then we went right from there to a brunch out Summit Hills, and didn't have a reception after the brunch. People lingered a little bit, but that was all. It was the day of the Kentucky Derby, and Nashua was running, and he was a favorite. Nashua did win, and we did go to Nassau on our honeymoon. And then that night at 11:30, we boarded the airplane for Miami because we were going to go to Nassau. And Nassau was really divine. I mean, you just felt like you were free, and I don't know, it was a fun feeling. And then all of a sudden you come back and you touch ground and you're back in the States and in Kentucky, and all the hardship and work comes back again. And my best friends were Claire Mosier and Peggy Nolan. Peggy right now is dying of cancer. Claire, she married Bob Bontel, and he signed up for the Air Force right away, and she was the first one married out of our class from the villa. And she's been down in North Carolina ever since. All her children were born down there. One of her children died coming home from their prom, and her husband had a stroke down there, but she still stays down there because her children all live down there. And I haven't seen Claire in a while. I wish they'd come up here and come visit me, but that won't happen. Now, what I did over the course of my dear life is, in training, I learned how to crochet and made some Afghans. I made some clothes, dressmaking, for the girls mostly, because I didn't want to have to fiddle with zippers and the boys fly. Now I want to tell you about some more shenanigans, good and bad, laughable and serious, that happened to my brave children as they got older. Sherry, April the 8th, 1955. So, I got pregnant right away, naturally. I didn't use any birth control. The fact is, there weren't any birth control pills around. That hadn't been discovered yet. And so, little Miss Sherry came along first. And then I started having this pain in my chest. Thought I was having a heart attack one night, 2 a.m., while I was trying to nurse her. And had tests made, and here I had gallstones, like grit. And so on Memorial Day, I was in the hospital, had my gallbladder out, and Lois stayed with Mother and watched Sherry. Because when I came home from the hospital, I wasn't allowed to pick her up because she weighed too much. And your gallbladder incision in those days, mine is about maybe 10 inches long. So you couldn't be carrying anything heavy. Sherry was a colicky baby, kind of hard to take care of. She cried all the time. As soon as you lay her down in bed, she'd cry. Well, Sherry, she was the artist in the family. She liked to take crayons and draw on my walls. I mean, really color my walls, different colors. All different rooms, different colors. And she also had an infinity for my lipstick. But one thing that embarrassed me to death was to be shopping and have her go up to a strange child in the dress department and bite her wrist and leave her teeth marks and the little girl would scream, and I'd cringe with embarrassment. It was humiliating. Sherry did study to become an LPN, and she did work over Holmes Hospital on the night shift, but she didn't like it, so she stopped and became a cosmetologist too. She loved to fix her little sister's hair, and they liked it too. Billy, April the 4th, 1956. Then I missed one period after that, and then the next one, I guess I got pregnant with Billy. For 4 days of the year, they're the same age. Billy, he was more content, and he's got to be 2 or a little tight. He was always climbing everything. Anything you could climb, he climbed. Billy, he was a risk taker. He could do anything, and he was brave. He wasn't afraid of anything. He could climb anything, take the clothes out of his dresser drawers, and climb up the drawers to get on top of the dresser for something that he saw from the baby bed. He was a diver, and he could do these fancy dives off the high board. He did the swan dive, the back dive, pike, and then 1.5 somersault and 2.5 somersault. He was a great asset to their swimming team. He also, at age 14, left from Bluegrass with another swimmer to Thumb to Florida. I knew nothing about it. I could not find Billy. I called everywhere. But he came back whole and entire and had a good experience, and that's all he worried about. He played the guitar, and he could make up musical pieces, but he never could get the words to them. He couldn't make it sing. He also went to L.A. once with his boss's son, only to get out to L.A., and he got a job, and then found out that the guy was gay and all his gay friends, and they tried to impose upon him, in which he fought, ran out of the apartment, thumbed and ran as fast as he could towards the airport, where he called us to wire him some money and send it to the airlines, and he came home by plane. Billy ended up being a geologist and graduated with a degree from NKU. He loved nature and the woods and everything to do with it. Greg was born in 1959. Greg, he was a little heavier baby. He weighed 8 pounds something. All the rest were under 8 pounds, and then there was 2 that were in the 6 pounds. Greg slept a lot. He took his bottle and he would sleep, and I'd go out. Kids would go off to school, I think. Maybe not. Maybe they weren't old enough. But I'd go out in the yard and be planting flowers and doing whatever, and keep coming in, look and see if he was all right. He was still sleeping. Greg didn't wake up till 11 o'clock in the morning, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. Greg, he kind of followed around Billy, and they made trails up in the woods, made camps, made tree houses with throwaway wood because they were building a lot of apartments at that time on Benton Road. Billy and Greg, when they were draining the lakes, the fishing lakes, up behind Slusher's house, when they first started to grade for I-75 Death Hill, and the water was running all the way down the hill, just like the road goes. Well, my 2 bright boys thought it would be fun to slush around in the bottom of the lake where mud was so sloppy and green and black and whatever. They came home with mud up to their necks. Their clothes, their shoes, everything was caked with mud and was dry, and could have killed them right there. Also, Billy and Greg got lost in Daniel Boone National Forest down by Yahoo Falls. We had to send a ranger in to find them, while the rest of the family spent the day in the parking lot. Kathy, July of 61. Then came Kathy, and Kathy was the littlest baby. She weighed 6 pounds 1 ounces. So she was awake and wanted a bottle every 3 hours. And then she took it so slow, it took her an hour and a half or so to take the bottle. So you never got any sleep at all. It was terrible. And that also was when Diane and Harold were going to get married. There was showers going on, and Sherry was in the wedding. And so we had to go to the showers and the wedding, and it was just so much activity that I got on a crying jag, and I cried for days. I couldn't stop crying. I guess I was like Kathy. I guess she realized the unsettledness of everything. I don't know. Terry, December the 23rd, 1962. Then came Terry. She was due 2 days after Christmas, but she came 2 days before Christmas. Just as we got started putting up the Christmas tree, about 11 o'clock at night, her water broke. So I didn't come home till the day after Christmas. And Bill had worked all night, so he was dead tired. And I wanted to get the formula bottles and everything ready. All the kids in the neighborhood wanted to come down and see the kids because the 2 boys went to Mom Neff's house to stay, and Sherry and Kathy went over to Lois's house to stay. So the neighborhood kids hadn't seen him, and they wanted to see the new baby. So that screen door banged 100 times that day. Then here comes Mother after work. She wants to see the baby. And she brings Ruthie, who she rides to work. Ruthie lived in the neighborhood, and she was also in my wedding. And so that day that I came home from the hospital with Terry was atrocious. Kathy and Terry played house. Mother gave them some of her clothes and some high heels, and they played that in the backyard and also on the front porch. They made pies out of mud, and they played this all the time. Little homemakers. And they still are neat like that, neat and clean. In 1964, November the 6th, was Jay. Then, let's see, after Terry, Jay, well, there was little space there, and we needed a car. And the kitchen sink and an old dishwasher from Uncle Bill was a mess. I needed to have the kitchen redone. So I went back to work in January, and I guess I must have gotten pregnant right after that because I was such a nervous wreck at work because I hadn't worked now for 7 years. And tranquilizers had come in, and I didn't know anything about that medication, all the different tranquilizers. And blood work, I didn't know all those enzymes and things that they were taking for heart attacks. They weren't taking, and I was scared to answer the phone taking doctor's messages because I was dumb. But it gradually got better. And Jay was born in November, and Mother said she would help us. I don't know if she helped us get the car or not, the Dodge Dart, but she helped us with the kitchen. We bought the supplies, and then each paycheck, I put most of my check in a savings account that was in my mother's name. And that way I paid her back, and she still got some interest on the money also. So that worked out real well. Jay, now he did some airbrush painting. He liked that. And he also took acrylic paint and painted store windows of whatever season it was or football game. But he also did a really dumb thing. Bill and I were in bed, not asleep. It's 4th of July. We heard a loud bang. We got up and investigated. Here we had a burned hole in the dining room rug, and Jay outside said, "A cherry bomb went in the window." He was excited about that. I wasn't. Also, on Christmas Eve one year, we had a swing put up in the basement, and Terry was coming through the door, one of the doors in the basement, and he let go of the swing, and it hit her in the mouth. knocked her tooth, not out all the way out of her gum, but out enough that it was out on her bottom lip. And we had to call Carl Rico and ask if he could fix it, which he did on Christmas Day. He pushed it in and then put some braces on to hold it in place to get it healed and sturdy again. Meg was born May the 10th in 1966. And then along comes Meg. I call her Maggles. She's still my baby, but she don't have much to do with me anymore, and it breaks my heart. But she was so bright and sunny, everybody called her Daisy. Doc called her Daisy, wanted to call her Daisy. And Meg was so good-humored and nice and personable as a little kid to anybody. Meg, I can't remember exactly what she did, but she was always bubbly. And she talked so much they called her Chatterbox. And she always was so sunny that Aunt Dot wanted to call her Daisy. She had freckles on her nose and on her cheekbones, and she could just talk away. Of course, all the neighborhood thought I had beautiful children. But as they got older, they got in trouble. And that's where I'm going to end now. In 1968, St. Elizabeth's closed its doors. No more School of Nursing because NKU had been built and they were going to have a 2-year nursing course. Also, that year was the year that the nurses at St. Elizabeth went on strike, and just about half of the people were gone, and we would have our meetings and so on. The nuns only wanted to give us $1 raise, but we ended up getting a $5 raise, which just about doubled my monthly salary. I was only getting $250 a month, so with $5, that was a big deal. We did get a month's vacation, though, and we were paid every 4 weeks. Also, at this time, catastrophe happened. We were all on strike, nobody at the hospital, and I don't know what kind of airplane it was, but it was a large airplane, was coming in over the Ohio River to the airport and misjudged the hill and crashed right into it. A lot of people died. A lot of people were brought to St. E's because really we were the only, St. Luke's was here, but really we were the only ones that could really take them. So we heard it on the radio and they were calling everybody in. So I went in too and to see what I could do. I stayed most of the night. And the people that were still alive were burnt crisp. Their skin was brown and they were burnt crisp and they were alive. Later, if they didn't die, they got sent to the burn institution, the Shriners Burn Institution. But we had the stewardess we had at our hospital. Her name was Toni Ketchel, and she had broken her legs had been broken in many places. And they wanted to amputate, and she didn't want her leg amputated. So Dr. Menke tried to put it back together, and she was on our floor for about 3 months. But it did all heal, and she left the hospital. And then months later, she came back to visit us one day, and I thought that was really nice. I did genealogy for like 27 years, so I couldn't hardly see the computer anymore. And on my wolf line, you go back so far to the Laniers, and then 2 Lanier daughters married 2 Washington brothers. And so there, when we get back far enough, it's George Washington's grandfather married one of my, I don't know how many but grandfather. And his name was John. So I did succeed in doing that. I got back to the 11th century. I did gardening. I guess my best flowers, daylily and the iris, they're so beautiful. In 1984, Medicare decided to cut back, especially their reimbursement to St. Elizabeth. But yet across the river, theirs was higher. So St. E's fought it in court, I believe, but we were off then for, I don't know how long, but I took my time, had my hysterectomy. I had a total hysterectomy. I was 50 years old, and I had a fibroid tumor the size of a softball. Dr. Gramata, who was in with Bill Avery, said he had to cut the tumor in half to get it out. But I did fine, and I went back to school in the right amount of time. Then in 1986, Bill retired from the post office. He had put in his 30 years, and he was getting pretty bad with his diabetes. And then in 89, he died. He only got 3 years of retirement. That's sad. But he had an easy death. He died at home with all of us around the bedside. Bill, he died the 20th of September. Mandy, Meg's little girl, I don't know if she had SIDS or not. She was just about 18 months old, and she died unexpectedly in her crib. And she died 1/1/1988. In 94, I went on a tour of Europe with Lois and Bill because Tanya was over there studying in Luxembourg. So we flew into Frankfurt, then we went to Luxembourg and followed the river up to Koblenz, where we got by the Rhine River and followed the road along the Rhine River down until we had to turn off to go to Heidelberg. You could see castle destruction in that high on the hillside. The Rhine looks a lot like the Ohio River with the hills on both sides. And Heidelberg was a castle, and it was a university town. And we walked all through it. And then we went on to Munich and saw the original Glockenspiel, that's the Carol Chimes over here, and went to different places, old walled cities. And then from there we went to Neuschwanstein, which was King Ludwig's castle. He was ruling over Germany at that time. Germany was kind of divided up in all different parts. It wasn't unified. And we toured that, and from there we went down to Switzerland. And in Switzerland we saw, I can't remember the name of the mountain, but there was a waterfall that ran completely through the mountain. It was really, really something. As we climbed up, the water fell down, and it was a lot of water. And then when it hit the ground outside, it just seemed to disappear. It was just a little creek, but more water inside. Then from there, we went across Switzerland and went to France. And there we went to a lot of different cities, trying to think back. But we wound our way to Paris, and then we flew back from Paris. And we were gone 2 weeks, and that was a really, really enjoyable trip. I learned a lot, saw a lot, and we all got along all right. We had rented a car, so we did our own thing and had it all mapped out where we were going. I worked till I was 62 so I could get my Social Security, and so when I retired it was 1996. Wally died. Wally Bessie, my stepfather, he died January the 14th, 1997. Now, I had moved to Fort Mitchell after Mother died. She died in March the 3rd, 2002. And the day of her birthday was a World Trade Center catastrophe. But I started painting, and now I've given most of them away because I can't go around to these different festivals and sell them. I would love to. And then my knee had been bothering me, so I had total knee replacement on the right side, and my back had been bothering me all along. So I said, after I get my knee settled, I'm working on my back. Well, I'm still working on my back. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I don't know how I'll ever get all right. I hope so. Right now, I'm at Brookdale because I can't take care of myself. At home, I can't stand that long and can't really walk. I'm walking with a walker. If I go anywhere, they take me in a wheelchair. Through all this time, I was tracing my roots doing genealogy. I had read an article in McCall's magazine about 1977 or 76, and that spurred me on. And as I went, I researched each surname, and each is a separate folder, loose leaf folder, and went to different courthouses and found cousins, fourth cousins all over the world, tapped into George Washington's line, and just met a lot of people. But then when I got macular degeneration, I don't know, it was in maybe 2004 maybe. I couldn't see the computer that well, and the glare bothered my eyes, so I more or less quit. But I still kept my eyes and ears open for any new information. And then after that, I had my cataracts removed. I was taking art classes and painting and did about 100 different things. Painted different subjects, flowers, and also I was becoming a gardener. And I had started a collection of irises and daylilies. I had about 100 different varieties of daylilies. December 21st, 2016, I had pain pump implanted into my abdomen, and then a catheter took it back to the spine, and it was a reservoir in this pump that held the medication, which was hydromorphine, very strong and potent. And Dr. Kelly had informed us that he was going to retire, and we would have to have a new pain doctor. So I went to Dr. Gupta, and he didn't like the fentanyl that Kelly used. He wanted hydromorphine. And so he ordered it, and it got inserted. And then I went back maybe a week or so later, and he upped the dose a little bit. They have a control box in which they set the rate and the amount that you're supposed to get and how far apart they are. Every 2 minutes or every 5 minutes you get a drop. And about 11 days later, I was found in my room sitting in a chair. I had eaten breakfast, was sitting there unconscious. And so they sent me to the hospital per ambulance. I was rushed to the ER, and the ER called my family in to come in right away because my blood test was all off. They were afraid my kidneys would shut down. I had carbon dioxide, 98% in my blood, shortage of oxygen. So the kids all came. I was in ER, and then I was taken up to ICU for 5 days. And that was an experience. Never been in ICU as a patient. In fact, this was a reverse time for me. I'm usually the nurse, not the patient. Here I was, the patient. And then I was transferred down to transitional care unit for 10 days. Then I was transferred to Gateway Rehabilitation Hospital, and I stayed there for 11 days. And each day I'd have 3 or 4 sessions of therapy. They worked me to a frazzle. Needless to say, I was really poor. So when I left there, I came here to Brookdale, and I'm living here in a 2 apartment, and I don't know if I'll ever get out or not. I hope. I've taken 2 rounds of therapy here, but they want me to take a quiet therapy also. So that might happen also. Finding me unconscious, they put me in an ambulance and sent me to ER at St. E's. They administered Narcan, but it didn't bring me around. Apparently what had happened was I got too much medication. Either Dr. Grupa increased the amount, or I was allergic to it. So he had said there's an invisible line. Either you get some relief from your pain or death. Well, I think I straddled the line, finally came back on to the living. I don't know. I just don't like going back to him, but I can't find another doctor. They're afraid of liability. This was really an eye-opening experience for me. And I want to give credit to John. He took me everywhere and did everything for me. And Kathy took care of the financial bit. Sherry did the shopping, and she had doctors to take me to, and Terry took me to doctors. And I really had the support, and I really appreciate it, and I want to thank them. Without them, I don't know if I'd even be here. And it still goes on at Brookdale, excuse me. My house is empty. Sherry keeps a watch over it, and so do some of the others. I'm here at Brookdale now for about a year and a half. Hope I get to go back. A doctor group had told us there's an invisible line. He said one side of the line is relief from pain, the other side is death. And I believe I straddled that line for a while, then ended up with the living. God saved me, brought me back. He has a plan for me, but I don't know what it is because I can't really do anything. I still have lots of pain, and that's ongoing. Billy died February the 8th, 2017.